The banner above the ballroom read, "Welcome new owner of Northfield Industries." A man in a plain white shirt, no tie, walked in. A woman whispered that he was Vanessa's ex-husband. Marcus Vance crossed the floor with a glass in his hand, smiling like a man who had already won. He said something loud enough for 400 people to hear. Nathan Cole answered quietly. Nobody caught the words. They only saw the color leave Marcus Vance's face. Then the slap. It cracked across the hall. Security had him by the arms before he could straighten up. He did not resist. He looked past Marcus, past Vanessa, to the stage. The host stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new owner of Northfield Industries." He had been silent for 3 years. What was he waiting for, and why tonight? 4 weeks before the gala, Nathan Cole's morning started at 5:40, the way it had started every weekday for 3 years. The apartment was 2 bedrooms over a dry cleaner's, and it was clean in a way that went past tidy and into something closer to discipline. Nothing on the counters that hadn't earned its place. 2 chairs at the table because 2 was what they needed. He scrambled eggs, cut a banana into coins, and set both plates down before he woke his son. Eli came out of his room with his hair flattened on one side, 8 years old and already talking. "Dad, the strap's doing the thing again." Nathan turned the backpack around, worked the buckle loose, and pulled the webbing back through so it sat even on both shoulders. It took him 9 seconds. He had done it enough times to know. Downstairs in the parking garage, Eli stopped walking and pointed at the ceiling. "4 red lights today," the boy said. "Yesterday there were 3. Nathan looked up. The little red dot sat in the corners where the sprinkler pipes ran, and the 4th one was new mounted near the elevator alcove sometime in the last day. "You're counting better than I do," Nathan told him. It wasn't entirely a joke. Nathan had spent 11 years reading rooms for a living, and rooms tell on people constantly where they put the cameras, which door they use, which chair they take. He had never lost the habit. He had only lost the salary that made it look like expertise instead of paranoia. They drove 18 minutes to the elementary school on Fulton Avenue. At the curb, Eli stayed in his seat. "Ceremony's on the 23rd, the boy said. "The award one. In the gym." "I know when it is." "Mom said you might be busy." Nathan turned so that he was looking at his son directly, which was a thing he had promised himself he would always do for the important sentences. "I'll be there," he said. Eli nodded once satisfied and ran for the doors. 3 years earlier, Nathan Cole had been the chief financial officer of Northfield Industries, and 800 people had known his name. Northfield had never been a public company. It was founded in the 1980s by 2 men with a leased warehouse, and it had stayed in private hands through 3 expansions, which meant that its ownership sat in a small circle of families and trusts, and that nobody outside the building had any right to see how it worked. Nathan had always considered that a strength. He learned later that privacy protects whoever happens to be standing inside it. What ended his career there was a payment of $9,400. It went out to a logistics vendor in the 2nd quarter, coded to a maintenance line that had no maintenance under it. Nathan flagged it the way the policy manual said to flag it in, writing up the chain copied to internal audit. He was thorough about it. He believed at the time that being right and being documented were the same thing. 3 weeks later, he was the one who left. Nobody fired him. There was a reorganization of the executive structure announced by memo, and when the dust settled, the finance function reported to operations, and operations reported to a newly promoted executive vice president named Marcus Vance. Nathan's role no longer existed on the chart. Legal called it a mutual separation. There was a payment attached and a clause about not disparaging anyone, and he signed it because he had a mortgage and a 5-year-old. Vanessa stayed. Her career was at Northfield, and Northfield was ascending, and Nathan was not. The divorce came 14 months after that, and the strangest part of it was how quiet it was. No shouting, no doors. A conference room with a laminate table and 2 attorneys and a custody schedule that gave Nathan the weekdays because Vanessa traveled. He had expected to feel wronged. Instead, he felt filed. He had left two things behind in that building, and neither of them was on any list of his accomplishments. The first was an off-site backup contract. Years before, when Northfield ran its accounting on a server in a basement closet, he had fought for it through 3 budget cycles. He picked the vendor, signed the agreement, and set the retention himself. 90 days of versioning every change, preserved every deletion recoverable for 3 months. After he left, someone folded that contract into a general infrastructure bundle and renamed the account to a project code, a string of letters and digits that meant nothing to anyone reading a spreadsheet. It kept billing. It kept running. It stopped being on anyone's mind. The second was a page in the access policy. After a laptop went missing at an airport, Nathan had written the rule that administrator credentials would function only on the internal network inside the building with no remote path in. Convenience was worth less than control. The rule was still in force because nobody had ever had a reason to change it. He did not disappear from finance. He simply stopped being visible in it. He raised a small fund with 2 former colleagues who had also been reorganized out of places they had built. He put it behind a holding company and the holding company behind a second one and called it Blackwater Ridge Capital because the name meant nothing, and that was the point. He worked from 9 at night until 1 in the morning after his son was asleep in a chair by the window with the lamp turned toward the wall so the light wouldn't reach the hallway. In 3 years, he made 2 acquisitions. Both were quiet. Both worked. He drove a 9-year-old sedan and shopped the same grocery store and wore shirts until the collars went soft, and every person who knew him assumed the obvious thing, which is that a man who looks like he is struggling is struggling. It was easier to let them. On a Thursday afternoon in the school pickup line, a black car pulled in 2 spaces ahead of Nathan's. Vanessa got out of the passenger side, dressed for the office, and looking like the office-capable finished unbothered. Marcus Vance came around the hood, and Nathan understood he was going to have to shake the man's hand. Marcus offered it first, which was the smart move. 45 years old, silver at the temples, a smile that had never once cost him anything. "Nathan," he said, "good to see you out in the daylight." The handshake was firm and correct and lasted exactly the right amount of time, and there was nothing in it a witness could have pointed to. That was the thing about men like Marcus Vance. They never gave you the insult. They gave you the courtesy sized precisely for a man who no longer mattered and let you carry it home yourself. Marcus went back to the car to take a call. Vanessa stayed. "He's outgrowing everything again," she said, watching the school doors. "The shoes he had in March are gone." "I've got it. That's not what I'm asking." She turned her head then, and what was on her face wasn't cruelty. It was fatigue, which was worse because fatigue has been thinking about you for a long time. "How much longer are you going to let him live like this, Nathan?" He had no answer that would fit inside a school pickup line. Eli came out at a run and took his father's hand and announced to both adults at once that his dad was working on something big. Vanessa smiled. Marcus returning smiled too. Only the 8-year-old had said anything true, and he was the only one nobody believed. The data room opened on a Monday. Blackwater Ridge had signed a confidentiality agreement and been granted access to 11,000 documents that Northfield's management had selected, indexed, and uploaded, and Camille Rourke had a team of 4 going through all of it. Camille had been Nathan's outside counsel for 6 years. She was blunt in a way that had cost her clients and kept the ones worth keeping. "Third quarter is too pretty," she told him over the phone. "Nobody's third quarter is that pretty." The revenue curve was smooth. Not strong smooth, which is a different thing, and a worse one. Real companies breathe. This one had a heartbeat drawn with a ruler. Underneath it, the cash was moving through 3 vendors. Different names, different tax identification numbers, different bank routing, the same street address down to the suite number. Nathan sat with the printouts spread across his kitchen table at 11 at night and found the first entry in the chain, the one that predated all the rest of it. $9,400. It was the same payment he had flagged 3 years ago. It had never been reversed. Somebody had read his memo, closed it, and kept going. Large fraud almost never begins with a large number. It begins the first time somebody lets a small one go and nothing happens to anybody. The second time is easier than the first. By the 10th time, the system has learned to call the wrong thing normal, and the people inside it are no longer lying. They genuinely can't hear the difference anymore. Marcus Vance sat at the center of every chain. Not as a signer. Marcus was careful, but as the approver of the approver, the name one layer back from every authorization. And every time something threatened to surface, communications got in front of it. A vendor dispute became a press release about supply chain modernization. A departure became an announcement about strategic realignment. Vanessa Cole ran that department, and she was very good, and Nathan made himself look at that fact for a full minute before he set it down. In the personnel folder, buried in an index nobody would read for pleasure, there was a transfer record from 22 months earlier. Reagan Doyle. Internal audit to records management. Lateral, no reduction in pay. Reason stated in the memo, not a culture fit. Nathan circled it. There were 2 more things in the data room, and both were in the marketing budget, which is where nobody looks. Northfield was turning 20 that year. Management had booked a gala for 400 guests and hired an outside production company to shoot a documentary interviews floor footage, the whole retrospective. The line item covered 8 weeks of crew time and a set of fixed-position cameras placed through the building for time-lapse. One of them was mounted in the lower-level corridor in the ceiling coffer 12 feet from the server room door. The gala program had gone to the printer 2 weeks earlier, and it included an item that management had been confident enough to schedule in advance, the announcement of the completed transfer of ownership. Camille came to the apartment on a Saturday with the purchase agreement and the thing she needed him to understand before he signed it. "There's a material adverse change clause," she said. "It's standard, and in this case, it's a noose. If a fraud of this size becomes public before closing, the buyer's obligation terminates automatically. Define public. Disclosure outside the walls. A regulator, a reporter, the lenders. Anything that lands in the world." She tapped the page. "Bringing it to the board itself in a closed session is a different animal. That's the company informing its own directors, which is what directors are for. But the moment it leaves the room, the deal is dead, and you have no say in it. And then Northfield is a distressed asset with a criminal referral attached. The lenders call the revolver, the company doesn't survive it, and somebody buys the equipment at auction." She let him do the arithmetic himself, and he did. 800 people. So the sequence was fixed, and it wasn't a preference. Buy first, then open the drawer. Which meant he could not go to a regulator, could not go to a reporter, and could not say one word to anyone at Northfield for 3 weeks. It also meant the evidence he needed would never come out of the data room because Marcus Vance controlled the data room. A buyer sees what the seller uploads. What Nathan needed was on the internal server in an abandoned cloud account and in a basement room full of paper. He signed the agreement at the kitchen table with his left hand, the pen turned in his signature, leaning backward the way it always had, the way his 3rd-grade teacher had spent a year trying to correct. The board vote was scheduled for 21 days out. Until that vote cleared the transfer, Blackwater Ridge owned nothing. 2 days later, a temporary contractor badge was issued at the Northfield lobby desk to a man hired by the production company as a second camera operator, day rate 8 weeks, no benefits. The photograph on it was bad. The name on it was his real one, because a fake one would have been a crime and because nobody was going to read it. Nathan slid the badge into his breast pocket, where it sat against the folded invitation to a 3rd-grade awards ceremony on the 23rd. There are times when stepping down a level isn't losing. It's just the only place to stand where you can finally see what nobody up there has been able to see. 18 days before the vote, the contractor badge opened the lobby turnstile and the freight elevator. Nothing else. Nathan learned that on his first morning, standing at the executive elevator bank with a camera bag on one shoulder and a shot list that said 14th floor. He held the badge to the reader. The light stayed red. He tried again, slower, and the panel made a small mechanical click inside itself, patient and final. At the reception counter behind him, a young woman with a headset spoke to the woman beside her without bothering to lower her voice. "That's Vanessa's ex," she said. "He does odd jobs now." There was no cruelty in it. That was what Nathan noticed, standing there with his hand still raised in the air. She said it the way a person reads a sign out loud. Somewhere in this building, a version of him had been written down years ago, and it had been handed along so many times that nobody thought to check it anymore. He took the stairs. 11 flights, the bag switching shoulders twice. 4 days after that, Vanessa found him in the third-floor corridor between setups. She skipped his name. She opened the door of an empty conference room, waited for him to pass through it, and closed it behind them. The blinds were up. Anyone walking by would see two people talking, and Nathan understood that this was the whole design of it. "You're on the crew list," she said. "I saw it this morning. Second camera." "Nathan." She put her hand flat on the table. There was no anger in her voice at all, and that was how he knew it would be worse than anger. "There are people on this floor who used to report to you. Do you know what it does to them watching you carry cases?" He said nothing. Anything he offered would be in a statement by Friday. "Do what you have to do." She straightened, and her voice went down, and for a moment the two of them were standing in a kitchen that neither of them owned anymore. "Just don't let your son see you here." She left first. He stayed in the room a while because there was nowhere else in that building he was permitted to stand. Of the 3 things done to him that month, that one cut deepest, and she never raised her voice once. 11 days out from the vote, the crew was shooting the quarterly operations meeting on 1420 department heads down a long table, and Marcus Vance looked up from the head of it and found Nathan in the corner behind a tripod. "Nathan." The word was warm, and it turned 20 heads. "Do me a favor. There's coffee in the alcove. You used to make it better than anybody on this floor." The room went quiet in a particular way. 2 people looked at their laptops. A woman near the door set down her pen and left it where it fell. Nathan stepped out from behind the camera, walked to the alcove, filled a cup, and set it down at Marcus Vance's right hand. "Thank you," Marcus said, and went back to the slide. Nathan returned to the tripod and put his eye to the viewfinder. His hands were steady. He said nothing at all. 3 years had taught him that an answer almost always costs more than silence. What he hadn't known until that morning was how much of a man is stored in his hands and how strange it feels to spend some of it on purpose. Nobody in that room forgot it. That mattered later, though it never mattered to Marcus. The job itself was the part nobody thought about, and it was the reason any of it worked. A second camera operator on a corporate documentary has a reason to stand in every hallway. He has a reason to hold still for 6 minutes. He has a reason to look up at ceilings. Over 9 days, Nathan filmed the plant floor and the loading dock and the 11th floor break room, the archive corridor, the mechanical level, the elevator alcoves that the director liked. He filmed ceiling coffers because the production company wanted texture in the cutaways. By the end of the 2nd week, he could have drawn the building's coverage from memory, where security had eyes, where it didn't, and where the production company's own fixed-position units had been clamped for the time-lapse sequences, 6 of them running to their own recorders, feeding to the production company's storage on no Northfield network and in no Northfield inventory. One sat in the ceiling of the lower-level corridor, aimed down the concrete at the server room door. He filmed the information technology office, too, because the shot list called for it, and because a young systems administrator named Dustin Pryor enjoyed being filmed and talked the entire time. Dustin scrolled his second monitor to show off the mess he had inherited, legacy services still billing every month against project codes that had outlived their projects. "Half of these I couldn't tell you what they do," he said. "That one's older than I am here. Somebody set it up, somebody renamed it, and now it's just weather." Nathan held the shot 6 seconds longer than the shot needed. The string on that line was one he had signed a contract for 7 years earlier in a conference room 2 floors up. 90 days of versioning. Every change preserved. Every deletion recoverable for 3 months. He panned off the monitor to the wall, packed the case, and thanked Dustin for his time. He noticed one other thing that week and filed it without knowing what it was for. The documentary needed a sit-down interview with the chairman of the board, and it took the producer 9 days to get one. Walter Brennan had co-founded Northfield Industries. He was 67, He came in 2 days a week, and the crew was warned in advance to keep it to 20 minutes because the chairman tired easily. He seemed anything but tired. He answered every question in complete sentences, and when the producer asked what he thought of the company's direction, he looked at the lens for a moment too long and said that the direction of a company is a thing decided by votes and that he had not won a vote in some time. The producer cut the answer. Nathan kept the sound of it. Records management was on the lower level past the mechanical room behind a door with a sign somebody had printed on plain paper and taped up crooked. Nathan went down to shoot the shelving. The woman working the aisle was crouched at the bottom of a row with a box of pulls in her lap, and she stood when the light changed and she recognized him before he recognized her. "You signed the audit certification the year you left," Reagan Doyle said. She was in her late 20s, sleeves shoved back dust to both elbows. She looked nothing like somebody who had been broken. She looked like somebody who had been assigned to a room and had decided to become the best in the world at that room. "I sent you an email that October," she went on. "3 vendors, 1 address. You never answered it. For 3 years, I assumed you read it and decided it wasn't worth your time." Nathan set the camera down on the shelf beside him. "It never reached me," he said. She took that in slowly, and something behind her face rearranged itself. "Then I've been angry at the wrong man for 3 years." She told him the rest, standing between the aisles. She had raised it again formally in a memo. 6 weeks after that, she was transferred to records management lateral no reduction in pay, a memo in her file saying she was not a culture fit. She had photographed the memo before it was filed. She had photographed a great deal more than the memo. The vendor onboarding packets, the wire instructions, the signed approval routings page by page on the desk in the audit room before anybody thought to stop the paper from coming through internal audit at all. And she had kept the originals themselves in a banker's box behind the seasonal storage on the 4th aisle. "I never took anything out of this building," she said. "That's theft. It's company property in the room where company property is filed. I just filed it where I could put my hand on it." Nathan asked her why she had bothered if she had already decided that nobody was listening. Reagan looked down the aisle before she answered. "Because someday, somebody was going to tell me I made it up." By the end of the 3rd week, they had something that felt like a shape. Camille Rourke drove out on a Tuesday night and sat at the kitchen table where the purchase agreement had been signed with the same yellow pad. Nathan mentioned the photographs first, and Camille shook her head before he had finished the sentence. "Images on a personal phone taken by an employee with a grievance 2 years outside any preservation order," she said. "No chain of custody, no way to authenticate them against anything. Opposing counsel will have them thrown out in an afternoon, and then they'll use them to argue that this whole thing was manufactured by a disgruntled clerk. The originals are the asset. The pictures are only a memory with a date on them." So the originals stayed where they were in place with an archive log proving the box had never moved. Nathan had 9 days of footage that established every camera position in the building and more usefully established that a crew was legitimately filming in every corridor of it. Camille had a forensic accountant on retainer and a preservation letter drafted ready to go out the moment the transfer closed. "Here's what we don't have," she said, tapping the pad with the back of her pen. "We can show cash moving to 3 shells at 1 address. We can show every approval routing 1 layer under Marcus Vance. What we cannot show is his hand on any of it. Every signature belongs to somebody 2 rungs down who will testify honestly that they followed the process. So he has to touch it himself. With his own credentials on a system that timestamps," she capped the pen. "And there is no reason on this earth for him to do that. The man is winning." Nathan looked at the pad for a long moment. "There's a reason," he said. "If he believes the raw logs are leaving the building." It took 2 days to set and 11 seconds to spring. On a Thursday afternoon, the crew shot interviews on the communications floor. Nathan was second camera, which meant he was the one who stepped into the corridor when his phone rang, and he took the call standing in the corridor, and he did not lower his voice the way a careful man would have. He said the buyer's diligence team had escalated. He said they had stopped accepting management's summarized reports and issued a formal demand for the raw third-quarter server logs, unfiltered, straight off the system, nothing prepared. He said delivery was due Monday morning. He said every word of it to Camille Rourke, and every word of it was true because Camille had filed that demand at 9 o'clock that morning for the precise purpose of making it true. Vanessa's office door was open. She stood 6 feet away with a document in her hand and her head down. Nathan ended the call, went back inside, set up the next interview, and kept his eyes off her office for the rest of the day. On Friday, Marcus Vance cleared his afternoon. The thing Nathan had come to understand about Marcus was that he was no fool. He was something more dangerous. He was competent, and he was certain. 3 years at the center of it, and nothing had ever landed on him. And a man who has never been caught does not learn caution. He learns that caution is a tax paid by lesser people. Prepared reports could be prepared. Raw logs could only be removed, and they could only be removed from inside the building because administrator credentials at Northfield had never worked from anywhere else, a rule written years earlier by a chief financial officer who believed convenience was worth less than control and left in place because nobody had ever had a reason to change it. At 11:47 on Sunday night, Marcus Vance badged into the lower level of Northfield Industries. He opened his laptop on the rack table in the server room, signed in with the administrator credentials he had held since the reorganization located the third-quarter transaction directory and deleted it. Then he went into the retention settings and switched off the log archive. Then he stayed a while longer doing other things. He badged out at 12:12. 3 facts sat outside his knowledge that night. The deletion triggered a synchronization event and a legacy off-site service billing monthly against a project code that meant nothing to anyone, captured the state of that directory in the instant before the change, and held it exactly as it had been built to do 7 years earlier. A fixed-position camera belonging to an outside production company sat in the ceiling of the corridor he had walked down, recording to its own storage on no network he controlled and no inventory he had ever read. And every action he had taken was bound to his credentials, his badge, and his session, so that in 25 minutes alone in a basement, he had done to himself what 4 years of careful distance had prevented anyone else from doing to him. Nathan Cole was nowhere near the building. At 11:47, he was sitting on the floor beside his son's bed because Eli had woken up wanting to know whether you could count something that kept moving. Nathan told him you could if you were patient enough. The boy was asleep again by midnight. His father stayed on the carpet a while with his back against the bed frame and his phone face down beside him, and no part of him felt triumphant, and that surprised him. Marcus came in Monday morning and knew within an hour that something was wrong. The logs were gone, which was the plan. But no confirmation arrived from the buyer's team, and nobody in finance called in a panic, and the silence told him what noise never would have. Someone had wanted him down there. He went nowhere near an investigation. Men in his position when the floor moves make certain that whoever is coming arrives carrying something of their own. It came in 4 waves, each one larger than the last. Tuesday, a petition was filed to modify custody, citing the father's lack of stable employment and an unsuitable residential environment. Vanessa's name was on the filing. The hearing was set for the 23rd. Wednesday, the contractor badge was deactivated, and a letter went to the production company stating that a crew member had been filming in restricted areas without authorization and that Northfield reserved all rights. The production company held a $200,000 contract with Northfield. Nathan was off the crew by 4 o'clock, and the case he was carrying was taken from him at the desk. Thursday, a file surfaced the onboarding packets for the 3 vendors, complete with an approval routing on the final page. At the bottom of that page was the signature of Nathan Cole, Chief Financial Officer. Friday, a complaint went to the county alleging unauthorized access to computer systems and misappropriation of trade secrets. The dates cited were the dates of the documentary shoot. Vanessa read that file on Thursday afternoon because Marcus brought it to her office himself and asked her to draft the statement. She was very good at her job, and she had one rule about statements, which was that she read the underlying document all the way to the last page before writing a single line. The thing that ends a communications career is a sentence built on air. So she read it to the end. And on the last page, she looked at the signature. She had watched Nathan Cole sign things for 11 years. School forms, a mortgage, a separation agreement on a laminate table. He was left-handed, he wrote, with his wrist turned in, and every letter he made leaned backward away from the direction of the writing, a small, stubborn slant a third-grade teacher had spent a full year failing to correct out of him. The signature in front of her leaned forward. She looked at it for about 3 seconds. Then she closed the folder, turned to her keyboard, and began to write that the company was disappointed and would cooperate fully with the appropriate authorities. Nobody knew she had seen it. Nobody would ever have known. It belonged to her now, and she was going to be carrying it a long time. After that, it came apart quickly, the way things do when they were built to come apart. 3 directors withdrew support for the transfer in a single afternoon, following a memorandum from management describing an active criminal complaint against a person connected to the acquiring entity. Not one of them called Blackwater Ridge to ask. Vanessa gave a statement to a business reporter under her own name. She said the individual referenced in the complaint had no current relationship with the company or with anyone in its leadership, that his personal circumstances had been difficult for some time, and that Northfield's cooperation would be complete. Asked directly whether the individual was her former husband, she answered that her personal history had no bearing on the company's position. It was the most skillful line in the entire statement, and the most damning. Thursday morning of the following week, Reagan Doyle's badge was collected at the lobby desk. A facilities notice closed records management for an unscheduled inventory. 2 men from an outside vendor worked the room for 6 hours. When Reagan was let back in on Friday, the 4th aisle had been reorganized and the seasonal storage consolidated. The banker's box behind it was gone, and the archive log carried no entry for its removal because there had not been one. That same Friday afternoon, 3 days before the scheduled vote, the Board of Directors of Northfield Industries resolved to postpone the transfer of controlling interest indefinitely pending resolution of the matters described in management's memorandum. Walter Brennan was recorded as voting against the postponement. He was 1 vote. On Monday, 2 security officers walked Nathan Cole out through the main lobby at 4 in the afternoon, which is the hour when the most people are moving through it. He had come to return a lens the production company still had on its inventory sheet, and that was all. They took it from him at the desk, and then they took him by both arms anyway, 1 on each side past the turnstiles and the reception counter, and 40 people waiting on elevators. On the second-floor landing, a woman who had once reported to him stood at the railing with her hand over her mouth and then took it away again. He didn't resist. He had done a smaller version of this 3 years earlier, and he already knew that the only thing worse than being carried out is being carried out struggling. Camille called that night from her car and told him what she was obligated to tell him. The deal was dead unless the board reconvened. The complaint would take months and would almost certainly go nowhere, and going nowhere would take longer than the material adverse change clause could survive. Her advice was to withdraw, protect the fund, and let Northfield find its own bottom. And the 800 people, Nathan said. Camille told him she was his lawyer, not his priest, and then she stayed on the line a while without either of them saying anything more. The awards ceremony in the gymnasium on Fulton Avenue began at 10 o'clock on the morning of the 23rd. At 10 o'clock on the morning of the 23rd, Nathan Cole was in a conference room downtown answering an attorney's questions about his employment history, his income, and the number of bedrooms in his apartment. He got home at 6. Eli was at the kitchen table with a juice box, and the certificate laid flat in front of him, both hands pressing down the corners so it wouldn't curl. He asked nothing about where his father had been. He turned the paper around so it faced the right way and pushed it across the table. "I saved it," the boy said. "You can still look." The most frightening thing is not being humiliated in front of a crowd. It is saying something true and understanding that a truth with nobody standing behind it is only a sentence. Nathan sat down across from his son and read the certificate all the way through both lines of it twice. People spend years believing that if they can only explain themselves clearly enough, completely enough, the ones they love will finally understand. The truth is simpler and harder to hold. The people who love you forgave you before you opened your mouth, and that more than anything anyone can do to you is what makes it impossible to lie down and stay there. The apartment was quiet at 11 at night, and Nathan sat at the kitchen table with everything he had left in front of him, which was not much. A copy of a personnel memo that proved a transfer, and nothing more. A yellow pad in Camille Rourke's handwriting listing 11 things they could show and 1 thing they could not. Reagan's photographs, which a first-year associate could get excluded. The certificate from the gymnasium on Fulton Avenue, still flat, still uncurled. Every door had the same shape. The evidence existed inside a building he could not enter, on a network he could not reach, in a room that had been inventoried by 2 men from an outside vendor. He had thought about the corridor camera all week and set it aside all week for a reason that had seemed obvious. Northfield had paid for that documentary. Northfield had commissioned it, budgeted it, and when it wanted him gone, made 1 phone call and had him removed from the crew inside a single afternoon. Whatever those cameras recorded had gone into a project that belonged root and branch to the people who had just thrown him out of the lobby. Eli came out of his room barefoot and sat down in the second chair without being invited the way he did, and looked at the paper mess for a while. "Remember when you took me to your work?" he said. "The Saturday one." Nathan remembered. The second weekend of the shoot, no sitter the building, empty the crew, filming corridors with nobody in them. Eli had ridden the freight elevator 4 times and eaten a granola bar on the loading dock. "I counted 11 red lights going in," the boy said, "but when we left there was only 10, so one of them broke." Nathan looked up. "Say that again." "There were 11, and then there were 10. Eli shrugged. "You said stuff breaks." Nothing had broken. 10 of them were Northfield's building security wired into the network indicators, burning steady around the clock. The 11th was the time-lapse unit, and its light came on only while the recorder was rolling and went dark between intervals. Its own recorder, its own card, its own storage at the production company under the production company's contract with the production company's counsel and the production company's retention schedule. Northfield had paid for a finished film. It had never owned the raw material, and it had no more right to reach into that archive than it had to reach into Nathan's kitchen. He picked up his phone at 11 minutes past 11 at night. What happened over the next 36 hours happened fast, and it happened because 5 things that had been set down separately, months and years apart, turned out to fit together. Camille Rourke sent a preservation demand to the production company at 7 the next morning, and a second one to its storage provider an hour later. Neither had any appetite for a fight. By 10, they had confirmed that all 6 fixed-position recorders had been pulled at wrap and archived intact, including the lower-level unit, and that nothing had been touched because their contract required them to hold raw material for 1 year. Walter Brennan took Camille's call at 9:40. He listened for 6 minutes without interrupting. Then he issued a written directive in his capacity as chairman, ordering the immediate preservation and production of all systems records and archival materials relating to the third quarter, with a copy to the company's outside auditors so that it could not quietly die in somebody's inbox. That directive did something else which Camille recognized before she had finished reading it back. It made Reagan Doyle's photographs admissible. An image on a phone with no chain of custody was worthless on its own. An image on a phone that could be matched page for page against a preservation order issued by the chairman and against system records recovered independently was corroboration, and the disappearance of the originals with no entry in the archive log stopped looking like housekeeping and started looking like the most incriminating act in the file. Dustin Pryor spent Thursday afternoon inside the legacy service that had been billing every month against a project code nobody could read. He found the third-quarter transaction directory in versioned storage captured in the instant before deletion hole. He also found the change record for the retention setting with the account that had switched it off. The timestamps agreed with each other 3 ways: system logs badge access records for the lower level, and the running clock burned into the production company's footage. 11:47 in, 12:12 out. The board of directors of Northfield Industries reconvened at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon at the written request of the chairman in the 14th floor conference room where a man had once been asked to fetch coffee. Camille Rourke presented for 11 minutes. She began with the versioned copy of the third-quarter directory recovered from an off-site service that had been running quietly since before most of the room had joined the company. She set the original entries beside the reported ones. For that quarter alone, the difference was $11 million. Traced back through the same 3 vendors at the same address, the 4-year total came to $41 million. Marcus Vance let her finish. Then he leaned back and spoke to the room rather than to her calmly in the voice of a man explaining a small technical matter to people he liked. A file, he said, is a file. Anyone can produce a document and call it a version of another document. The party presenting this material was the same party whose principal was currently the subject of a criminal complaint for unauthorized system access. He suggested respectfully that the board consider who had the motive to manufacture exactly this. It worked partly. 2 directors looked at the table. At 5 minutes past 4, Walter Brennan asked Marcus Vance to leave the room. The next item, he said, concerned him directly, and no officer sits for a matter that concerns him directly. Marcus rose without hurry. He straightened his cuffs, told the chairman he understood completely, and walked out with the expression of a man humoring a procedure invented by someone who had already lost. He had held this line for 4 years, against everyone who had ever come at it. He had no reason on earth to believe it would give way in the 15 minutes he was gone. The lights went down behind him. There was no narration and no exhibit list. The footage ran with the clock in the corner, an empty corridor on the lower level, concrete pipework, the door to the server room 12 feet from the lens. At 11:47, Marcus Vance walked into the frame. He was carrying his own laptop. He let himself in with his own badge. He never once looked up because there had never been anything above him that he needed to be afraid of. The room watched 25 minutes compress into 90 seconds. Then they watched him come out, close the door behind him, and check the corridor in both directions before he walked away. Nobody spoke for a while. It was not a document. It was a man. Walter Brennan stood up. He said nothing about ethics, which surprised the people who had spent years deciding he was ornamental. 3 months ago, he said, I went and found Blackwater Ridge Capital. Nobody in this room knew that, including them for most of it. He had known the company was being drained. He had known it for 2 years and had been unable to prove it, and more importantly, had been unable to stop it because the votes went the other way and kept going the other way until he stopped calling for them. So he had done the only thing left to a man who has been outvoted in his own house. He had gone looking for a buyer clean enough to withstand what was coming and stubborn enough to stay through it. And he had never disclosed the 4% held in a family trust from the original capitalization voting through him by proxy, sitting in the founding file since 1998, because in a company with no public market and no outside eyes, nobody had ever needed to count it. He counted it now. The board approved the transfer of controlling interest at 4:40 in the afternoon. Closing completed at 6 o'clock. The banner in the ballroom had been hung 2 days earlier, and the program had gone to the printer 2 weeks before that. The gala was the company's 20th anniversary. It had been on the calendar for a year. The documentary had been commissioned to feed it, and 400 people had accepted invitations long before anyone imagined a fight. Slotted into the run of show between the founder's retrospective and the dessert service was a line management had been confident enough to print in advance the announcement of the new ownership of Northfield Industries. Marcus Vance had read that line as a promise. In his understanding of the evening, the board had walked him out of a room, taken a vote he assumed had gone the way every vote for 4 years had gone, and left the item on the program as an embarrassment nobody had bothered to strike. He arrived early. He drank the way a man drinks when the difficult part is behind him. Nathan Cole came in at 8 in a plain white shirt, no tie, and Marcus crossed the floor toward him with a glass in his hand and 400 people watching. Whatever Marcus said was loud, and it was meant to be heard, and half the room heard it. What Nathan said back, he said quietly so that only one man in the building could hear it. "Sunday night you went in at 11:47. You came out at 12:12. He looked at him without any particular expression. "I've been wondering what a person thinks about for 25 minutes in a room like that." The color went out of Marcus Vance's face. The slap cracked across the hall. Security had him by the arms before he could straighten up. He looked past Marcus, past Vanessa, standing near the second column, with her fingers closed hard around the stem of a glass, and found the stage. The host stepped to the microphone and read what had been handed to him at 6 o'clock that evening. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new owner of Northfield Industries, Mr. Nathan Cole." The two officers holding his arms let go so quickly that one of them apologized. Nobody was fired in that ballroom. Marcus Vance was placed on administrative suspension that night in writing, and his access was revoked while he was still standing in the room. The materials went to counsel, and from counsel to the county attorney's office over the weekend. He was asked to remain available. He was in fact stopped on Sunday afternoon at a departures counter, not by anyone dramatic, but by the ordinary and unhurried machinery that catches up with people who have run out of layers to stand behind. Vanessa Cole was suspended from her position pending findings, which is a smaller word than the room expected. No one arrested her. No one accused her of anything that first week. She simply lost everything slowly, the way a person does when the only thing they can be charged with is 3 seconds of looking at a signature and then closing the folder. The transfer memorandum that had moved Reagan Doyle to records management was pulled from her file and voided along with the sentence about culture fit. Her badge was reissued Monday morning. Northfield began restructuring the following week. It closed one distribution contract and consolidated 2 floors. There was no general reduction in force because the money that had been leaving the company every quarter was no longer leaving it. And once that stopped, the arithmetic everyone had assumed was about labor turned out never to have been about labor at all. 6 months later, the company posted a profit. Reagan Doyle ran internal control by then. The first thing she built was an anonymous reporting channel that routed to the audit committee and to the chairman, bypassing every officer in the building because she had learned in the most expensive possible way what happens to a memo that has to travel through the person it describes. Blackwater Ridge stayed small. Nathan's 2 partners kept working the way the 3 of them always had, at night out of sight, and neither of them ever put their names on anything either. Marcus Vance went to trial in the spring. Vanessa moved to a city 400 miles away and lived quietly. One morning in October, an envelope arrived at Camille Rourke's office with no cover letter and no return address, containing the original of the fabricated onboarding file, the one Marcus had brought to her desk, and asked her to write around in 3 lines in her handwriting, explaining what she had noticed on the last page and the date and the hour on which she had noticed it. Nobody asked her for it. It saved her nothing. It was simply true, and late is better than never. At the anniversary celebration the following year, Eli Cole stood beside his father at the edge of the room and tipped his head back to look at the ceiling. 12, he said. Not one of them's missing. Nathan said nothing. He put his hand on his son's shoulder and left it there. Some victories are not measured by who has to leave the room. They are measured by whether the child standing next to you still expects the world to be where he left it. Then he walked to the place on the floor where he had been struck and stood in it. He raised nothing. He settled nothing. He looked around a room that had watched him be nobody and was now waiting on him, and he said the only thing worth saying. Silence isn't something you carry forever. Sometimes it's just the time it takes for the truth to be able to speak on its own.